Hello and good afternoon. Thank you for joining us as we examine the life cycle of an ArchivesSpace bug. Please note this webinar is being recorded. As an application fueled by the enthusiasm and energy of an incredibly proactive community, ArchivesSpace development continues to grow and evolve, sometimes faster than it can keep up. And though each release is carefully examined and tested by our testing subteam, bugs still manage to sneak their way into the code. Today, we will follow an ArchivesSpace bug's life by examining the community's approach to identifying, reporting, prioritizing, and fixing bugs. Presenting today, we have Jason Loeffler, Technology Consultant for American Academy in Rome. Jason is a developer with over years of experience working with archives and digital collections. Jason is a member of the ArchivesSpace Technical Advisory Committee, the Integration Subcommittee, and the Development Prioritization Subteam. We also have Lydia Tang, Special Collections Archivist Librarian for Michigan State University. Lydia has been heavily involved in ArchivesSpace activities. She currently serves on the Youth Council and is co-lead the Prioritization Subteam. She also has served on the Report Subcommittee and as chair of the ArchivesSpace Staff Interface Enhancement Working Group. Following, we also have Patrick Galligan, Digital Archivist at Rockefeller Archive Center. Patrick oversaw the RAC's migration to ArchivesSpace from Archivist Toolkit and is also a member of the ArchivesSpace Technical Advisory Committee, the Integration Subcommittee, and the Development Prioritization Subteam. And finally, we have Laney McGlohon, Technical Lead for ArchivesSpace. Laney is an information scientist, software developer, librarian, and self-described data wrangler with 7 years of experience working with special collections and institutional archivists. Thank you all for joining us today. Jason will start us off by sharing an overview of what bugs are. Lydia will provide a demo on how anyone can submit a JIRA ticket. Patrick will share on the Development Prioritization Subteam's role to prioritize bug fixes. And Laney will round us off by describing how the bug fix is designated into the code. We'll hold for questions at the end.
Okay, thanks for joining, everyone. This is Jason, and I'm just going to do kind of an overview of bugs in general, which will lead into the rest of the talks. I'm starting by going through some of the prehistory and early history of computer bugs, web application bugs. I'd like you to consider the work of Grace Hopper, who is a computer operator at a naval research laboratory in Virginia in 1947. Hopper was working on the Harvard Mark II, which many of you work with the notion of the cubic foot. So for context, this was an 816 cubic foot electromechanical machine that did pretty advanced mathematical operations, mostly with punch cards, but also with electromechanical relays. And Grace came in one day and ran her algorithm, and this is what she said. And after a bit of research, triangulating the problem, trying to find out where the error arose from, she found a literal bug between two relays. It was a dead moth. So a bug's life in some ways starts with a bug's death. Hopper would make a great archivist. She collected the specimen and put it into her log and dated it. And commented that this was the first actual case of a bug being found. In many ways, to this day, an application is very much like the Harvard Mark II. It's simply a way of a machine taking a set of its instructions and outputting a result. And something in the system isn't working. And this is a bug. So how do you find the bug? Well, The most basic algorithm there is for finding a bug is finding the proverbial one wolf in Alaska. Through process of elimination, you divide the state of Alaska in half and you listen to the wolf and determine which side of the fence it's on. And then you further divide that half and divide again until you can see the wolf. This is a very simple notion of the process of elimination. That is not always possible, even for the most seasoned developer or quality assurance engineer. So we have some tricks to simplify the problem, make an outline, begin by understanding a little bit about the application and its constituent components. From a very high level view, it's important to understand how ArchivesSpace is built, what languages it uses, what scripting languages it uses, what its development environment is, and how the pages are served to the front end. So put in a nutshell, ArchivesSpace is a server-side application built on JRuby on Rails that runs on top of a JVM. And it includes a REST interface through an API, a search engine, and a pluggable architecture. As an archivist, that's pretty much all you need to know. For a developer, obviously, this is an endless conversation about the different ins and outs, the input and output for the application and how things are handled. But in a generic way, it's good to know what each of these things are. Maybe just read up a little bit, go into Wikipedia, look up what each of these things are, just so that you have a little bit of understanding in the enormity of the ArchivesSpace application stack. As you're already familiar, most applications have a front end. It's what the user interacts with, and a back end. Generally, that's the server, the runtime environment, and the database. Again, as an archivist, as a user of ArchivesSpace or a developer, as an archivist, that's pretty much all you need to know. As a developer, obviously, it's a much longer conversation, but we want to keep this kind of high level at the moment. Some of the causes of bugs, obviously, first on the list is human error. I did something wrong. I keyed something in incorrectly and it threw an error. I did something that the application wasn't expecting. Quite often, flawed code is a problem. Maybe something snuck through a testing suite and was compiled into a release and is causing problems for end users. A lot of what we see in ArchivesSpace lately are incompletely implemented features, particularly with things like the OAI PMH harvester, the OAI PMH server. There are elements missing from the mods array, or certain facets that aren't working correctly, or PUI implementation that wasn't fully realized. Things like that, which strictly speaking aren't bugs, they're just incomplete features. But for the purposes of ArchivesSpace and JIRA, which Lydia will talk about in a minute, we'll just call those bugs. Incompletely scoped product requirements, this is a big one. Sometimes we go out to the field and ask for comment on a particular new functionality or a new enhancement to a release, and we'd like to get as much feedback as possible on that before we start coding. So sometimes those requirements are incomplete, or people come in later and say, oh, hey, what about this? And it kind of turns things on their head. Those are all potential entry points into sort of having a bug appear. Problems arising from unanticipated use cases, like things arising from incompletely scoped product requirements, or strictly speaking, not bugs. We can more sort of completely characterize those as feature requests, which again is maybe a longer talk for another time. Again, most bugs come through the community by interacting with the front end. Other sources of bugs result from migrations or code updates or problems with the server that the application is running on, insufficient resources such as memory or CPU. ArchivesSpace can be a resource hog, so that can cause problems. These are all important things to understand when you're working through a bug, when you're working through an issue or a series of errors with ArchivesSpace. One of the best things you can do, I think, right away is to report your environment in a bug report. Again, this is something that Lydia will pick up on. You can ask your system administrator to open up port 8089, which just reports the version of ArchivesSpace you're using, the database that it's operating on, and a little bit about the Java release that you're using. You want to expose that only internally to your local campus and not publish that to the world. And then report your context. What were you doing and why? And be as precise as possible about your experience when encountering the bug. Preventing bugs is, I think, should be really the most important part of any discussion on bugs. The two key things you can do to sort of cut down on the number of bugs we see in ArchivesSpace is participate and contribute. There are a number of community-based situations you can involve yourself in, councils, working groups, sub-teams. There's always room for everyone. You can participate in the Google group or the JIRA issue queues. We like to see comments on as many bugs as possible so that we can further refine and also establish expectations for how quickly something can be resolved. Contribute, developers, of course, Laney will talk about that, about making pull requests for merging in bug fixes, and everyone else contributing to functional specs and requirements gathering. Again, a critical part of further developing the next releases of ArchivesSpace. Most important thing, of course, is be like Grace Hopper, be a good archivist and document your experience, document your bugs. Can't impress this enough. If you encounter an issue and a week later you report it, you're not going to remember all the details that went into recreating that issue. So document it right away. The more bug reports that we have, I think the better the application will ultimately be. That's all I've got. Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you, Jason. My name is Lydia, and I'll walk you through the process of submitting JIRA tickets. I apologize because my son has given me the plague, so I'm kind of sick. Submitting JIRA tickets it may be something that a lot of people have already done, but I'll go step by step this time in case there are some people that this process is new for. So the first step, you can go on the ArchivesSpace.org website and go to the application drop-down menu, and there's the Sandbox right there. Otherwise, the link is sandbox.archivespace.org, and from there, it leads you to the Sandbox, which should be updated to about the most recent release. You can see the release version, which is a 3-digit code right by where I've circled the public site, which is where you can click to interact with the public interface Sandbox version. Also, you can see down there circled next to it is the issue tracker. That is our JIRA database for logging bugs and feature requests. So anyway, the first thing that you'll want to do is try to verify and replicate this issue. And so you'll need to sign in if you're wanting to replicate it with the staff interface in the top right corner. And so the username and password are both admin, so ADM for both places. You can also post a message to the ArchivesSpace users group. I would also recommend searching their archives. So if you just do an internet search for ArchivesSpace users group, you can find this page online. And then you can also search the existing JIRA tickets in that issue tracker or development project or the JIRA database right there. So that is development.archivespace.org. So before you submit a ticket, first you should ask whether it's truly a program issue or whether it's a local instance issue. So paying member institutions have access to some limited technical support through Lyrasis. So if it seems like it may be a local installation issue, it may be worth contacting the program first to see about if there's something with your individual database that might be causing the problem. Otherwise, another question is whether this is a localized issue that might actually be more of a feature that that you may need to develop a local plugin, for example, in case it's not actually a bug within the system. But assuming that it is a bug, then what you can do is in the lower left corner, there's this kind of strange little icon here. I don't know even how to explain it. It's an arrow perhaps to a door, and it says login / create an account here. And so it's free to create an account, and I would recommend that you do that because that way you can keep track of the tickets that you've submitted, and it also enables you to be alerted anytime somebody comments or changes the status of the tickets, which will eventually happen as it goes through the development prioritization process. So yes, if somebody comments in asking for more information, this is a good way that we can reach you. So you can see here also that I've indicated two places for step number 2. So one is to just simply search the tickets with that little magnifying icon along the left-hand corner. The other way is to browse labels, and so it's important to note the labels when you're creating your ticket. This can also be a useful point of browsing for tickets in case you want to help contribute votes or clarification for existing tickets. And then the third step is with that little plus sign along the left-hand column is to create a new ticket. So in creating a bug ticket, the issue type has to be a bug. There are other options such as feature requests and a few other things too, but we're talking about bugs here. And so in the summary, please put a brief descriptive title that summarizes the problem. In the description, where it's basically cut off from the screen right here, is the place where you can add text that describes the what led up to the problem and how the problem behaves and the desired behavior. Uploading steps or additional specification if needed is highly encouraged. Also, try to assign a priority according to the severity of the issues. The rankings range from trivial being the lowest to
blocker being the most severe. Additionally, it would be helpful if you assign a couple of labels, and it's always helpful to try to keep with the existing labels. That way, like group tickets can be viewed together if need be. So labels such as accessibility or digital objects or staff interface or user experience, all this is very, very helpful. The affect version is the version of ArchivesSpace in which the problem was encountered. So that's where it's important to check what version of ArchivesSpace you are currently using. And it's also important in the description earlier to say whether you've already replicated it in the Sandbox on the most recent version too. The other data fields are used internally by program staff and can be disregarded. So I've put together a little list of model JIRA tickets. There's a couple after this one. And so this one I really admired because it gathered membership input to draft up detailed specifications on a new feature. So this was a ticket submitted by Corey Neimer. And what was so great about this ticket is he collaborated with another ArchivesSpace user on this issue. And they rallied together interested people on the member list, email list, and crowdsourced a really impressive, robust specification. And so that's what we want to see. We want to see that that these tickets are meaningful for the entire ArchivesSpace community, and to get a wide variety of perspectives on these issues, to make sure that we're creating a tool that's flexible for all the variety of needs that the membership has. As you can see here, on the right-hand column are votes and watchers. So to vote for a ticket is pretty obvious. This basically would say, yes, I endorse this. And watchers is a little bit more if you just want to stay tuned on the ticket. So again, if it moves from status within the development prioritization queue, which Patrick will talk about, or if people comment in or add other screenshots or things like that, you'll also be alerted to it. So I definitely recommend, if you find tickets that you're interested in, to vote or watch on various issues. Okay. Some other tickets that I also appreciated was there was a minor bug ticket about the tooltip falling off the edge of the screen. So it could be for big bugs, it could be for small bugs, but it's all constructive feedback. And so this person submitted a screenshot with it to demonstrate the issue. So that's very helpful. And then a third JIRA ticket right here also includes descriptions, commentary, and screenshots relating to the classification breadcrumbs. So for more information, or just to review the information that I've already talked about here, please go to the How to Report a Bug page on the ArchivesSpace Wiki. Thank you so much.
I'm just going to spend some time talking about the development prioritization team, who we are, what we do, and what happens to a JIRA ticket after it's been reported specifically for bugs. So the development prioritization team is relatively small. We're a cross-council sub-team made up of the User Advisory Committee and the User Advisory Council and the Technical Advisory Council. We're currently co-led by Jason Loeffler and Lydia Tang. So thank you very much. And besides Jason and Lydia, the sub-team is made up by Corey Neimer, Megan Blair, and myself. And we're also joined by Christine DeBella and Laney and Laura Woodford regularly. We have calls twice a month to discuss the JIRA tickets that have been put in that Lydia was just talking about. So what do we do? So our main jobs or purpose are to review feature and bug requests on JIRA for accuracy and then discuss their priority. In general, bugs generally have higher priority over feature requests due to their nature of breaking expected system. So we try and get to those as fast as possible. As Lydia was talking about in her section, there is a general workflow for JIRA tickets, and once they've been added, they can be added to awaiting prioritization, ready to come to us. So what we do is that we'll take a look at these JIRA tickets, figure out if we need more information, whether the tickets are ready for development work, whether we can replicate it, and then we'll decide the level of criticality or level of priority for each ticket, whether it's trivial, minor, major, or etc. We try and get to the major issues as soon as we can. So the general process is that once we get the tickets in and they're awaiting prioritization, they are then looked at by either Jason or Lydia and assigned to each member of the development prioritization team. Given the amount of time that we have for each meeting, we really only have time to talk about 4 or 5 tickets each. So that's probably about 20 to 25 tickets per meeting. And what we do is that we look in our own time outside of the meetings, look at each report, each ticket, test for different things, and then comment on the group where we can discuss. Of tickets is often fairly large, so sometimes we are looking at tickets that are, I don't know, about half a year or more old, but we've been doing pretty well about getting through them as fast as possible these days. So what happens once we are assigned a ticket is that we each verify the issue, provide clarification comments on the ticket when necessary, look for duplicates of this ticket to see if they're related, check to see whether this has already been fixed in a newer version. So since we're dealing with tickets that are sometimes like 6 months old, they could be from several versions ago that could have been fixed in releases already. Determine whether the bug is a local issue or that has been created by changes to the application, or whether it's a wider spread issue that is still in the general release. So I'll try and talk about each of these stages in a little more in depth about how I personally go through looking at a bug, and each person has probably a slightly different take on what they're doing, but it's generally close to each other. So personally, the first thing I do after we get assigned our tickets is like look at it and read it, and this is a ticket that was recently assigned to me for our next meeting, and it's bug request or ticket for something to do with the API, which I've worked with and know how to test a little bit. So going through this a little bit based on what Lydia has shown us, this was assigned by a member of the ArchivesSpace community, Alex Dury. It is classified as a bug with a minor priority, and for this in version 2.2. This is, I try and read through it in full, particularly noting the version that's been affected, make sure that everything makes sense to me, whether I understand what's being asked, and I always want to check against the newest version of ArchivesSpace when I'm testing this. This one deals with posting new agents to ArchivesSpace through the API and the error that's being returned from the API when it's finding a duplicate agent. It's not affecting functionality so much, just the reporting of what's happening, which is why I think why it's been reported as minor priority. Reading through this, I have a couple sentences, 2 paragraphs, understand what the issue is, and I can feel like I can test pretty well, so I'm moving forward with this. At which point I do some testing. Like I use, when I'm working, I use a tool called Postman, which you can see a screenshot of the error message there. And I was able to duplicate Alex's issue and came to the same results against the newest version of ArchivesSpace. So this is like JSON error text. It's basically, it's returning the wrong conflicting record URI link. It should be returned. So I won't go into deep specifics, but this is when I would maybe add a comment to the JIRA ticket saying like, yeah, I was able to duplicate this. It is a little confusing. I would suggest fix depending on developer time, and have a larger discussion about priority at that point. So let's say I've done that for all times. Then our calls are when we get back together and review the tickets. In some cases, like this one, the bug is really straightforward. So all I need to do is test, make sure we understand what the problem is, where it might be coming from, and then provide some insight into the error, and then open up a larger discussion of this bug. In some cases, the ticket won't have enough information for us, or it will be worded in a way where we don't fully understand what the user is asking for, or we don't really know what to test for. This is why creating really good JIRA tickets is important for us. When we don't have enough information, and we'll have to comment back and ask for more information or clarification. In these sort of cases, I'll usually offer up my thoughts to the larger group and ask if anybody also has more insight, and we can do a quick testing right then and there. But generally, we have to reach out to to the original reporter. So we'll also sometimes run into issues where tickets that are reported as bugs but may actually be feature requests. We'll have to discuss whether we actually think this is something that issue with the system, or whether something that, as Jason said, is not strictly a bug. Those can often lead into larger discussions, but that's why we have the group and a quorum to discuss it. And so if I'm unable to replicate the bug, or if it's already been fixed, we'll also add comments to the ticket that we're not able to replicate it, or it might be a local issue. This time I was able to replicate it, so it's pretty straightforward. Yeah, this is a bug. What should we do about it? So we try and provide information about like the background of the ticket, what we were able to figure out about it, and where we're going in the future. And so our final point during these meetings, and maybe the biggest part of what we do, is determining the priority of the bug or the feature. A lot of things influence the prioritization of a ticket. So an unknown ability of a lot of ArchivesSpace member representatives is that they can vote on the importance of JIRA tickets through our JIRA system that everybody should have access to. We also try and take into account like existing goals of development prioritization work. For instance, features changing the staff interface may be put on a lower priority right now if we're currently working on a major overhaul of the staff interface, because they might get tied back up into that larger work. We're also trying to gauge the community priorities of things. If we've seen people talking about a bug on the listserv or in greater conversations in different communities, and they say it's a big deal for them, the larger community will probably try and prioritize it as higher than if we don't hear anybody really complaining about it, or if it's minor versus major issue. And so finally, one of the biggest priority to the ArchivesSpace dev prioritization team right now is like the developers' capacity to do the work. I think right now we only really have Laney and Laura as full-time developers, with additional people on Lyricist, or sometimes people like Mark Cooper offering time sporadically when they can. And there's only so much that 2 full-time people can do. So in the interest of being upfront, a major change that has been reported as a minor bug may, due to the amount of work that Laney and Laura have to do to it. So let's say a minor bug will take a ton of work and a lot of time to fix, but a major bug will take less time. We're probably going to prioritize that major bug first. Yeah, and so that's why we have calls, so we can have an open discussion with them about what they're working on right now and whether they think a change of any level might be feasible at a certain amount of time. So that's basically it for our workflow. We have different prioritizations. One, either assigning it for to developers, whether development's been started yet, whether we need more clarification. So we move it away from a waiting to different queues, but a general open process that we have a pretty good discussion about. Oh, and Lydia wrote in chat that I totally missed that Suzanne is also a member of the development prioritization team from the UAC side, and that is totally my bad for missing that. So thank you all, and I think it's time for Laney.
Okay, hey everybody, can you hear me okay? Oh great, okay. So what I'm going to talk about is, so now we've had a bug identified and we've had it prioritized. So now what happens? So generally what happens once we've prioritized a bug, either Laura or I or one of the community developers will grab it and say, hey, I want to work on this. I think I know how I can get this implemented and fixed. So one of the first things you're going to want to do when you are ready to start working on fixing a bug is forking the ArchivesSpace GitHub repository. That will require a GitHub account, but if you go to the ArchivesSpace GitHub repository, there's a place that I have circled in the slide that if you click on that, it'll fork it into your personal repository. Next, once you've forked the code, you're going to want to clone your fork onto your machine. I'm sorry, this is going to be a very geeky section of this talk. But anyway, what you do is you fork the code. Once you fork the code, you create, you clone your GitHub fork onto your machine, and then what you're going to want to do is check out a branch in that clone on your machine, and I have the command right there. Generally what we try to do is we try to include the JIRA ticket number in the branch name so that it is easy for people to understand what ticket they're working on, and then later on I'll show you when you put in the pull request, there's actually a hook between GitHub and JIRA that automatically happens if you have the JIRA ticket in your branch. The next step is to determine where in the code to make the changes. I think that's the hardest part. Jason talked a little bit about the organization of the ArchivesSpace code base, and I think if you are interested in that, we would probably need to have a more in-depth webinar on how to look at the code and what kinds of things to look for to fix certain types of bugs. But before you even make code changes, there are some automated tests that you can run with your clone of the repository, and that's what the build run bootstrap and the build run backend test is showing on the slide. The bootstrap actually sets up your environment so that you have all of the code that you need in order to be able to run ArchivesSpace, and then the build run backend tests will actually run backend tests for you. Generally, when I check out a new version of ArchivesSpace or I clone it, I run these to make sure that everything seems okay in on my system, so that when I start making changes, I know that I started off with a clean, good version of ArchivesSpace. Next is the fun part. You get to make modifications to the code. I'm going to kind of gloss over this because it can get pretty detailed, but once you figured out where you want to make the changes, generally what I do is I start making my code changes. I rerun the tests that I already ran to make sure that the JIRA issue has been resolved. Then once I feel good about the modifications I've made, I check the code changes into the fork that I have, and this will actually create a branch into the fork in your forked repository in GitHub. And there are a few steps that you'll need to do, and apparently I forgot to put those in here, but you'll push your changes to your fork. And then you're going to create a pull request. So what a pull request is it's an indicator to the GitHub repository that you have code modifications that you are ready to have reviewed and put into the core code base. So what you do is you go to your GitHub repository, you look, and it'll show you that you have added a branch or checked in your branch, and you can create a pull request. You'll see where I have it circled with pull request. You just click on that. What will happen is it'll come up with a comparing changes screen that is shown on the bottom of the slide. I used an example of a fork that I'd done of Bobby Fox's CSV importer. So you'll see on the left there's a base fork, which is the Harvard Library repository, and then the fork on the right is from my repository. You'll see the head fork has my name and then the name of my branch, and then there's a green button that says create a pull request. And what that does basically is it sends a message to the repository you forked from that says, hey, I've got code I want to change, I want to get put into the master code base, and it'll point back to your fork. So here's an example pull request that I pulled off of ArchivesSpace that was still available 2 days ago, but I think it's already been merged. You'll see that the name of the JIRA ticket number is in the in the top part here, along with a little bit of a description of what changes were made. You can see that it says that Laura Woodford wants to merge one commit into the master branch of ArchivesSpace from Laura Woodford, which is her GitHub repository, and the name of her branch. So once you've created a pull request, what happens? We have a group of community members that's called the Core Committers Group, and these are active community members who are tasked with reviewing all of the pull requests that come into ArchivesSpace, determining if it's ready to go into the core code base, and there are a couple of wiki pages that tell you who's on the Core Committers Group and actually a description of the pull request process. Let's see, right now members of the Core Committers Group are Dave Mayo, Steve Majewski, Laura Woodford, Rhea Parker, Esha Data, me, and Mark Cooper. And I hope I haven't forgotten somebody. I think that's the group. So you should go to the wiki, these wiki pages, and it'll give you an idea of who's on the group. Oh, Alex Duryea. So sorry. I forgot Alex. But there are two wiki pages, the core committers group page and the pull request process, that'll give you a better feel and a better description of who the group is and what the process is. So what happens with the pull request review? Basically, a pull request will show a difference between the code that you want to merge and the code that's in the master branch. And so these changes are reviewed for completion, whether or not they are generally applicable for the community as a whole. Sometimes we're all focused on what our institution needs, and sometimes the code changes might be a little bit more specific to an institution, so we try to look out for that. So there's basically three possible outcomes for a pull request. The first one is accepted as is and merged into the master branch. The second one is there's conversation back and forth through comments on the pull request. And then after all that has been looked through and changes have been made, then it can get merged into the master branch. There is a possibility that the pull request could get rejected, and that's for things like incomplete implementation. The code changes aren't generally applicable. And one of the other things we look out for is if we think there needs to be more talk or discussion in the community. So those are I think the main cases that would cause it to be rejected. So you got a pull request, you put it in. So we have the core committers are going to do their review. Trying to figure out time frame of when your pull request will be reviewed and merged, or whatever the outcome is of the review. We have a roadmap, and I've got the link here in the slides that talks about broader information about what's going to go in each release. The core committers group tries to review pull requests within 24 to 48 hours of the pull request being submitted. Depending on what day of the week it is, it might be a little bit longer if there's a weekend in between. So once everything's been reviewed, what we try to do is we have certain deadlines for each of our releases, and we try to freeze and not accept new pull requests for the next upcoming release for about 2 weeks before the release comes out. So basically what we've been doing is we've been doing releases at the last day of the month. So we try to freeze the code and don't accept any more pull requests for that specific release on the third Friday of the month that the release is coming out. One of the things that I've been trying to do is to include milestones. You can do milestones on the pull request that will give you an indication as to whether it made the deadline for the next release and which release it's actually going to go in. And I believe that's it for me.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you all for sharing on your insights in working with bugs and prioritizing them and reporting them and fixing them. So now we'll open up the floor for any questions or comments or ideas, feedbacks, experiences working with ArchivesSpace bugs.
Should I jump in on this?
I mean, you could jump in. I was under the impression.
Responding to, yeah.
I was under the impression, given I'm relatively new to the dev prioritization, so you've been here longer, but I thought that voting was still a small consideration to the prioritization. But go ahead. Great.
So this goes into some kind of legacy workflows, and I think we need to update that documentation. A couple years ago, the way it worked was that they had one member representative for each institution, and they did a round of voting for all the existing JIRA tickets. And so it was very controlled, and it was only for a short amount of time. And I think now, I think it's a lot less formal, but I would say that it's definitely helpful when we see these votes. So if you do support a ticket, please go ahead and vote for it, because it indicates to us when there's broader community interest in this ticket. Answering Laurel's question about if the listserv community is quiet on an issue and I can't replicate it in the Sandbox, can I reach out to Christine with an email first or proceed to bug report? I don't want to volunteer Christine for everything, but if it's not possible to replicate it in the Sandbox, then it could be a local implementation issue. So it would make sense to me, in my opinion, to go ahead and get in contact with them. They have a special email for technical support. I think it's ArchivesSpace Home. Christine, Kim, would you be able to help me with it at lyrasis.org, I think? Yeah, okay, great. And so that might be a good place to troubleshoot first of all, especially if you've raised it on the member list and there's crickets and you weren't able to replicate it. Yeah.
Yeah, and what we usually do with those type of requests is we'll play around and try to see if we can replicate it also. And then depending on what happens, usually we'll forward that on to Lyrasis support. And some of the folks, Laura's involved, Blake and Mark, they're all really helpful with helping to troubleshoot issues like that.
Yeah, I know from my particular experience at Michigan State University Special Collections, there was some issues with orphaned containers and stuff like that, that eventually we did have to get in touch with ArchivesSpace Home and have them kind of comb through what happened. And yes, they were very helpful.
Tom Adams asked what the normal turnaround time from a bug report to a release change is, and I don't know if there actually is one. I mean, Laney, you can maybe jump in here, but like it really depends on the bug itself and the amount of work that needs to be done to fix it.
Yeah, I would say that we don't really.
Yeah, exactly. If it's a blocker ranking ticket that is so horrendous that it has, we have to jump on it basically. But other times, sometimes it takes a little bit longer than we would like to get around to fixing all of them.
And a lot of times it depends on if it's kind of related to something else that we're already planning on putting in. And it would be easy just to fold it into some other modifications that we're making that are kind of around the same bug problem.
I think it also depends a little bit on like whether it's a change in 5 lines of code in a self-contained section, or whether it's a change that has to be made throughout the entire system and possibly even impacts like the model to actually make the change. So.
Oh, what I was going to just add to that is more about the turnaround time and what Patrick said earlier about the limited staff that are actually dedicated to this project. Get involved if you can in whatever capacity of your skill sets to help the system move forward. And so that's the reason why I'm involved with ArchivesSpace, to just help keep moving the system going forward. I don't have any programming background, but I try to contribute in other ways that I can.
I see Dave Lowe is asking about Java 10. Right now we don't have any plans on the horizon for upgrading to Java 10, but we're constantly trying to do maintenance on the infrastructure of ArchivesSpace, and so we're trying to work in a process in which on a regular basis we look at things like upgrading our Java, upgrading JRuby, upgrading main infrastructure pieces. But I'm not sure exactly when we'd be getting up to Java 10.
All right, it looks like it's just about that time. Thank you all for joining us today for this webinar. The recording of this webinar will be available soon. If you have any other questions that come up after this webinar, please feel free to contact us and email that in or call us. Thank you and have a great afternoon.